All right, well, I think we can just get things rolling now. So, to those of you who are just joining us, very good afternoon, good evening, or good morning from wherever you may be joining us from. My name is Ejaz Kadanush. I'm on the team at Aero Explorer, the world's largest youth led aviation platform. If you'd like to check out more of what we're about, head to aeroexplorer.com as it's spelled there on our guest's slide there. Um, and today we have a very special guest. I'm so thankful for our guest joining us today, and that is Mark VanInwegen, who is the head of supply chain at Eviation, a very, very exciting company that's been on our radar for some time. So Mr. VanInwegen will be providing us with some very valuable information, including his expertise of over 20 years of aerospace experience across engineering, manufacturing, and of course supply chain. So he'll tell you more about how aviation is very likely going to impact the future of aviation. Um, so just to give you a little bit of a rundown of what's going to happen today, obviously Mr. Vanderwegen will go through his presentation. We do have some questions that you guys have submitted prior to the webinar, and we'll do a little Q&A session answering some of those questions towards the end. We do also have a live Q&A option here with this software. So if you'd like to submit some questions in the Q&A section of the webinar, please do feel free to do so. I'll be checking those every now and again. For now, though, I will hand off to our guest, and I really hope you guys enjoy. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and good evening, depending on what part of the country you are in. I'll walk through a couple slides here and talk about myself and talk about aviation and some of the fun challenges we're experiencing as we try to electrify aviation. But I want to start with just a video. And I guess we're not going to have sound for this video. So if you can just imagine very inspirational music playing in the background. But what you're going to see in this video is the first flight of the world's largest all-electric aircraft, which is named Alice. This took place on September 27th of last year. I was there. It was a phenomenal day. It was one of those rare days in life where in your career, where you really have done something that has never been done before, that makes the news, that is just very historic, and the effort to get into that was immensely exhausting. But yet, when you're there and you watch a clean sheet airplane fly for the first time, and you're knowing that it's using all electric, and there are several other firsts that happened with that flight, it really just leaves you kind of with a really good feeling. So I'm going to click play, and again, just listen to some music in the background. I'll try to maybe give some verbiage here. This took place in Moses Lake, Washington, which is a kind of in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the state of Washington, and took place at about 7 o'clock in the morning. Got up to around 3,500 feet above sea level. It flew two oval loops at around 160 knots. Flew just as expected, landed, came back, and then we celebrated for the next few hours. That's our pilot, Steve Crane. That's our majority shareholder, Richard Chandler. And then somewhere in the background there, you saw myself. I'll start by introducing myself. So I'm doing this very simplistically with pictures. So I'll start at the upper left. I went to Purdue. I'm an engineer by training. I majored in mechanical engineering. Um, for all the reasons you go into engineering, you love math, you love science, you love inventing stuff. I did a little stint in automotive before I moved to Seattle and worked for Boeing. I worked on the 757, which they don't make anymore, but I always tell people, yeah, there are planes flying in the sky that have my name on the drawing as the engineer. So I did live that world of aerospace engineering for several years. But I did go back to school. I went to Carnegie Mellon and got a master's in business, really to open up. I wanted to get into operations and manufacturing and supply chain because I just saw that in my time at Boeing that there's a tremendous opportunity to do things better and to do things differently there. I think everyone understands what engineering does, but what does supply chain really do in an aerospace world? So that's why I went back to school to get a master's, and then I moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and spent the next 17 years working for Honeywell Aerospace, and all of it was in Phoenix, Arizona. But they have engines factories, they have avionics factories, they have OEM, new production, and aftermarket. And I got a chance to rotate through all those different businesses. Also got a chance to travel the world. My whole time there was in various operations roles, ranging from manufacturing engineering into supply chain, materials management, a strategic role looking at the manufacturing and supply chain footprint for all of Honeywell Aerospace across the world. Really a very really got to see a lot and do a lot, all while staying in one location in Phoenix, Arizona. Then in 2019, this new space phenomenon was coming on board with Blue Origin and SpaceX and quite a few other smaller new startup space companies, and that just really appealed to me. Um, Honeywell, Boeing, they're existing organizations. They're introducing new technologies for sure, but they're also in a largely sustaining mode where they're running their existing businesses. And Blue Origin was really just focused on technology, and their mission is millions of people living and working in space. And it was just a really cool vision. I love the Pacific Northwest, so I moved back here into the director of supply chain strategy, which was similar to what I had been doing when I left Honeywell, which is looking at all of the different supply chains that Blue Origin had, from machining to avionics to castings, forgings, explosives, and trying to figure out what the appropriate mechanism for getting those parts. In some cases, we would make them, in some cases, we would buy them, who we bought them from. And how we bought them was all something that I had the pleasure of working on. So we got into several joint ventures with some suppliers that really enabled us to secure supply for parts that were just really hard to make, and really just a fun experience. I talked about the first flight of Alice as being one of those moments that you rarely get. And I was there when they had first human flight of the New Shepard rocket, and Jeff Bezos and his brother went up into space. That was another one of those moments that was just really, career defining, and just you remember that. And then this last June, I joined Eviation, which really you can see the path I'm going from Honeywell to Blue Origin to Eviation. I'm going further into the startup mode, and Eviation is truly still a startup. We flew a plane, a tech demonstrator, but we have a long ways to go in terms of just building a company and building that plane and redefining it. And Blue Origin was a little further along. They were kind of at the inflection point where they were expanding and had really been through their startup and had been growing quite a bit. Around 2,300 employees when I joined Blue Origin, and now they're up to 7,500. So really just a phenomenal experience. So the rest of my slides here are about aviation and the electrification of aviation. So this really for me to have left Blue Origin and to come to Eviation, really, there had to have been something pretty significant, and this is the case. This is aviation really uh, hasn't had any real breakthroughs in technology since the jet engine. There's been a lot of improvements and a lot of things that have made, but nothing that has really shaken or transformed the industry like the jet engine until now, which is electrification. And you're seeing it in a lot of different ways. So the problem we're trying to solve is obviously greenhouse gas emissions. Right now, aviation's about 3 or 4% of the total worldwide greenhouse gas emissions, but it's one of the fastest growing. It actually is the fastest growing industry and contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And if we stay on the path we're going down and we keep spitting out traditional jet fuel planes, by the time we hit 2050, the share is going to be 25 to 50% of all the worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. So now it's not just a small contributor; it's the pink elephant in the room, and it's something that has to be addressed. And anyone who's worked in aerospace knows it's a very long lead product. Designing a plane, certifying it, getting it into production, and getting it out there takes many, many, many years. So it's important that we start this now, and the urgency and the sense of urgency is there. One thing I know from Honeywell is the operating cost of a gas powered plane, and fuel and maintenance are typically 50 to 70% of your combustion engine operating cost. So fuel, I think we all understand fuel, and gas burning engines that have your traditional Brayton cycle where you have your cold section rotating and your hot section rotating and your combustion chambers and all of your bleed air valves and all the complexity that goes into a combustion engine. Those are all very high wear items and they require a lot of maintenance over the life of an airplane. So those are the two biggest costs are fuel and the maintenance costs. And obviously, with electric aviation, those numbers come down significantly. Noise is something people tend to not think about, but I think it really came to light with electric cars, and I'm sure everyone has heard an electric car go by, and suddenly it's like, wow, that's really quiet. And electric planes are the same, with one exception in that we have a propeller that's spinning, so it's sort of like a fan where there is a wind noise there, but it's certainly not the same as the uh, the combustion that's taking place with a gas powered engine. I live in Seattle, and they've already predicted that the SeaTac airport is going to be at capacity in just about 5 years from now. So they're looking actively to build new airports because we need them, and no one wants them in their neighborhood. And noise is the single biggest reason why no one wants an airport even close to their house. They want it 15, 20 miles away. They're fine with the drive, but they don't want it any closer to that. And then this unique middle mile aviation section, which I'll talk about. This is an area that used to be thriving. I remember when I was at Purdue in the 90s, you used to be able to fly out of the Purdue airport and go to Chicago on a 9-seater prop. And it was very small. You crawl in, it was very tight. They move you around to keep the weights and balances proper. And and that was a very, very viable model. But when you're only flying 9 people in a very high cost jet or propeller plane, the economics don't work. So it's been really stale. A lot of people on this call have probably never even been on one of those middle mile or commuter jets, and yet there is a tremendous need for that range of an aircraft. Okay, so now Alice, you saw Alice in the video. Some of the target performance numbers are there. Those numbers are not accidental. We're keeping this as a Part 23 aircraft. If we were to go even slightly larger in weight, we would become a Part 25, which is what your Boeings and your Airbuses are. That's a much more stringent and costly certification standard. So we're keeping it just below that to keep it at the Part 23 certification. Um, Range is something that is very, I'm sure we'll talk about that in the questions, but we have issues with batteries, and it's not as energy dense as fuel. So uh, I'll tell you about half of the weight of the Alice airplane is batteries, and there's a cliff. There's a formula I've seen. Once you keep adding weight to it, you kind of go off the cliff, and then you just can't get the plane up, and you can't get the range at all. But we're at that sweet spot where we can add batteries and keep it at an 18,000 pound plane and still get enough range that our customers are actually quite happy with a 250 nautical mile range. So going through all the things I talk about, the zero carbon, the lower operating costs, the greater convenience, and the quieter. let me jump to the next slide here, which is really interesting. Um, More than half of the scheduled flights that take place today are actually less than 500 nautical miles. And if you look at a 500 nautical mile range map, it really it connects largely all of Europe. It connects the whole northeast of the United States, connects the whole Midwest. You can't fly across the country, but you can certainly fly from major city to major city, which is what a lot of scheduled flights are. And this chart shows that. Now, the orange there didn't quite come up, but 29% of the flights are actually less than 250 nautical miles. Again, you're still connecting Boston to New York and to DC, and you're still connecting Paris to London within that very short range. Uh, but these are flights that you can either jump on the big plane and go through the airport, or you can have this alternate experience where you're going to some of these underutilized airports, and you're jumping on, not going through the long lines and security. You're jumping on an Alice, and you're flying not from Seattle to Portland, but from a regional airport outside of Seattle to a regional airport outside of Portland. And you're doing that very simply, and you're avoiding all that crazy overhead of those big busy airports. Okay, so this kind of talks about the same thing with the transition from the hub and spoke to the point to point. And this has been going on for decades. It started over the Atlantic when you used to have to fly to New York, and then from New York to London, and maybe from London to a smaller city in Europe. And now you fly directly from Seattle to London, or you fly directly from Atlanta to Stuttgart. You fly from these smaller cities on a smaller plane, and it's really why the 747 is not being made anymore. It's why the A380 isn't being made anymore. People want the point to point. We're taking it kind of even within the United States or within Europe. You can take that even further, and instead of flying through the hubs that exist today, like in a Los Angeles or a Denver, you can fly point to point. I lived in Phoenix for 17 years, and Phoenix is the fifth largest city in the country, and yet there were very, very few direct international flights that you could take out of Phoenix. You were constantly having to go to Los Angeles to get your larger flight. Um, and what's also not shown in here, all these underutilized airports. So Purdue has an airport. A lot of colleges have airports. There's a lot of small towns that have airports, and most of those people drive to Seattle or drive to Indianapolis or drive to Chicago. They drive to those hubs, and they go through that whole hour and a half experience of getting there early and going through security and walking to their gates. And yet there are these underutilized airports that have all that infrastructure that can serve these smaller commuter jets, but yet the smaller commuter jets are not economically viable because they use gas and because they have all the maintenance requirements. Um, but you certainly don't want to tie up a slot at SeaTac or Los Angeles with these smaller planes. You want to fill that up with the 737 or something bigger. So that's really the niche that Alice is serving. So our order book is now actually over $3 billion. I don't know that that's public yet, but we've announced several more orders. And again, the range is short here, but you see, if you look at these pictures, you see a lot of water, and you don't see it in the Air New Zealand or the Australia, but it's there. These are routes that are generally very short, but you either take a ferry or you take a bridge. Maybe you take a bridge, which is an inherent bottleneck. And these short flights are very, very economically viable. As the range changes and as the battery technology grows, the range will grow, and then we will introduce this aircraft to some of the more traditional airlines like United and American, who don't want to have different types of airplanes in their fleets. But we've got more than enough backlog. um, I want to say it's over three, maybe even over 400 now, 400 planes, which is going to take us well into probably the next 8 to 10 years to produce all those airplanes and get it out there and get it into service. Air New Zealand is the only kind of premier tier one airline that we sold to, and they frankly approached us, as did DHL, because they're very interested in pursuing sustainability programs. And they did a thorough review of all the planes that are out there and the different options and technology, and they chose us and sought us out to be part of their sustainability programs. So Cape Air, just for example, Cape Air flies out to Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod and Hyannisport. They do fly into Boston. That's really the only big city, but they're flying to all these smaller airports that are only served via ferries or bridges. Global X is out in the Florida Keys. Australia's NTAS is in Australia and New Zealand and flies back and forth from the different coasts of those countries. And some of the other airlines that we've announced are very similar. So we are really, as a company, we found this sweet spot of this Part 23 aircraft with nine passengers. We can do this with existing battery technology. We know that. The range, would make someone from United or American cringe, but it doesn't make these airlines cringe. And it allows us to get the plane out there. And then as the battery technology matures, and it's maturing every year, and there's different roadmaps that show how it's going to mature. But as it's maturing, it allows us to then just swap out the batteries that had the 250 nautical mile range with batteries that have a 500 nautical mile range or a 700 nautical mile range, and that's really how we're going to grow our sales. And I wasn't sure the video was going to work, so I just threw some photos in there. Like I said, that was a really it was a nerve-wracking day in a lot of ways because we all knew that if we had a problem, and we live streamed this first flight, and we knew that if there was a problem and the plane didn't perform, or God forbid it crashed, the company was over. But none of that happened. It performed exactly as we thought it was going to perform. This lower left, this is the leadership team at Eviation. This is the CEO on the far right. Here's me, kind of in the middle. This is the pilot, Steve Crane, who has been with us for several years. This is Richard Chandler. He's the owner of the Claremont Group, which is the primary shareholder in Eviation. He's a billionaire out of New Zealand. And then on the far right is the everyone who was there that day, which is maybe half of the company, or maybe a little bit more than half of the company. And then the sky was just beautiful that day with the feathered clouds, and just FYI, we this first flight happened at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it really happened as soon as the sun went up. Reason for that is the winds are much lower in the morning, and you want to keep, minimize the variables. So we wanted to have this flight happen as early in the morning as we could. The visibility tends to be clear, and there's minimal winds to interfere with the flight. So that was all I had for my slides, and I think I will just open it up to questions.
Oh, that was fantastic. It was really interesting to listen to. Thanks, Mark, for that. So just to thank you. Um, so yeah, of course, I've got some prepared questions from some of our registries from earlier. So I'll just pull those up. Um, and I guess we can start with well, obviously you're now obviously your background being in Boeing and Honeywell and stuff, and you've got your qualifications in like you said, mechanical engineering. So what is it that really prompted you to kind of move into more of the management side of things rather than the hands-on sort of engineering work, as it were?
Yeah, that's a. I'll tell you why I did it, and why I've kind of sometimes gone back and said, was that the right thing to do? But part of it was when I joined at Boeing. It was a big aerospace company, and you were very focused on one particular part. So I worked on the 757 interior panels, and that was my scope of the world. And I sat with people who worked on 737 and 767 and 747 interior panels, but I was limited to just that that commodity, and I wanted to see more of the plane. Now, so I go back to school, I get into operations as a way to kind of broaden my background and work in a factory where you see different products coming through there, and it it seemed like a very natural link to me to have someone who understands how parts are made then go into the factory and to be able to kind of marry those two up. And I still think there's a tremendous opportunity out there in aerospace and in other industries to break that traditional engineering operations supply chain silos and put them all together into one. And it's really one of the main things I joined with Eviation is that we, out of sheer necessity in our size, is that our engineers and our suppliers and our production people are all just working in the same room on the same problem and are able to to kind of leverage each other's knowledge to solve the problems. But that was why I went back to school. And when I was at Honeywell, I really enjoyed moving around into the different roles. Every role was a challenge. I think if I were ever in something for more than 2 to 3 years, I started to get a little bit bored with it and just wanted to move on. Now, when I joined Eviation, which is a smaller company, we're probably 80 people right now, and I sit here with all these engineers, and within this, I'm looking at the room here. Uh, the landing gear engineer and the flight control engineers and the structural engineers were all here. So joining a smaller company that you can really talk to all these different functions, you really can gain a technical appreciation for an entire airplane. And I love it. I love the fact that I've, despite as gray as I am with all that I've done, I love that every day I'm learning about the wiring system of an airplane or how complicated the steering system is and how the flap actuation works and how the different primary flight controls versus the trim and things, even having spent all the time I did with Boeing and Honeywell, parts of an airplane that I just never had the experience to work on. So it kind of depends, pluses and minuses of both. And I'm sorry I'm giving a long-winded answer here, but uh, a bigger company has the maturity, has the processes, has the ability to move around and grow and mentor people. A smaller company has so many technical challenges, but they lack the processes, they lack the maturity, they lack the mentoring. So very much pluses and minuses of both. I would encourage people to really kind of, especially when they're younger, to move around and experience both a smaller company and a larger company and see the differences and see kind of which one is more appealing to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Now, our next question. You mentioned earlier, obviously, part 23 and part 25 sort of certifications. Now I go to Embry-Riddle. You probably heard of the college, one of your rivals, as it were. And obviously, trained to be a pilot, we do learn a lot about the systems and components of aircraft and what part 23 and part 25 means. But in case some of our guests don't know, what really could you expand a little bit more on what Part 23 really means in terms of certification of an aircraft and what really kind of goes on, I guess, behind the scenes to get a brand new aircraft certified that we as passengers may overlook?
Yeah, and certifications is something that is just it's a field into itself, and it's surprisingly gray. You think regulatory and you think everything is black and white, but it's really not black and white. There's a lot of nuances to it, and obviously a Part 25. Um, Lots of things like you have to run through all these testings where you can have to make sure you can get 200 people out of the airplane, and you have to have the escape slides and layers of testing that you don't have to do with a Part 23. A Part 23, this will be might even be the largest Part 23 aircraft, but it's at 18,000 pounds. It's 9 passenger. If we really went any farther above that, it would put us into Part 25 territory. So it's still an FAA type certification for the design. It still has to go through that process, but a lot of the rigor and the it's just a simpler plane by not having 200 passengers on it and only having nine. Getting the passengers off, uh, are some of the things that you just don't have to have. Um, the the challenge with the certifications, uh, without getting into too complicated, you have the FAA in the U.S., you have EASA in Europe, you have the Transport Canada in Canada, and then there are quite a few other countries that have their own uh, authority organization, and they all work together, and they all have agreements on what they share. And if you certify a plane in one with the FAA, it tends to get approved by EASA through a bilateral agreement. Now, interesting things. The 737 Max that's flying around today is really based off the 737, the original 737 that was certified back in the 60s. And every time they modify it, they just amend their approval with the FAA versus something like the 787, which is a truly a clean sheet design that goes through a lot more rigor and just a lot more scrutiny from the regulatory agencies because of what's at stake there. So Alice is a clean sheet design. So we're working with the FAA because we're based in the United States and we're pursuing an FAA approval. Uh, and however, because it is a clean sheet design and because it has all electric motors, which are new technology, it's not a given that all the other agencies are going to kind of accept the FAA's approval. There will be discussions with EASA and there will be discussions with Transport Canada about getting their approvals for this. And we actually have a roadmap that we will get FAA first, and then we will get EASA, and then we will get to Transport Canada. And like I said, it is a little bit of a gray area. Um, uh, and it really comes down to a lot of the common sense and documenting doing what you say you're going to do and making sure you have the proper documentation and the proper testing. Hope that's not too long-winded of a rambling answer.
No, not at all. That was very helpful. I'm linking back to the stuff that we've learned in our classes in terms of, how much pressure do the hydraulic lines have to withstand in a, Part 25 certified aircraft. There's all sorts of things that go into it that's just very, very intricate. And like you say, it's not always black and white necessarily. And you got to make sure that you're working with all these different safety agencies to make sure things are to standard. So no, thanks for that. Moving on to our next question, if you don't mind. This is more specific to Alice itself. So obviously powered by batteries, as you said. I can't remember what proportion of the weight you said was its battery. I think you said 50% of it
It's
is.
almost half, yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of its endurance, let's say, so how long it can remain in the air, what is it right now? Are you guys aiming for a specific sort of number? We know you showed us its range, but typically, how long of a flight do you think it would be able to sustain?
Yeah, so short answer is it's about a 30-minute to a 90-minute flight. And about an hour is kind of the rough, if you're looking for just a rough number to throw out there, but it serves very well for a 1 hour flight. There are a lot of different, we liken it to a balloon. You squeeze the balloon here, it comes out here. You squeeze it there, it comes out there. Depending on the weather conditions that you're taking off, the altitude, how fast you're flying, how much weight you have, whether the battery, the battery technology, if you charge it very fast, and this is the same with your cell phone, by the way, you charge it fast and you drain it fast, that will degrade the life of your battery faster than if you charge it slowly and drain it slowly. Um, Same thing with how deep you drain it. So if you're flying for the full 90 minutes and you're draining it down to the very end, and you do that every time, you'll actually degrade the life of the battery faster. So lots of different things go into that, and it really comes down to looking at our operators, how how are they going to operate it? What's the type of route? What's the type of weather? If you're flying it in the Northeast in Boston and you're going to have a large anti-ice build up and you have an anti-ice system, that's draining the battery a little bit. If you're operating it in the summer and you're going to have an air conditioning system on the ground, that drains the battery a little bit. So all those factors are all sort of trade-offs that all kind of have an impact on whether you're going to get a 45-minute flight or an hour or an hour and a half flight. The other interesting thing here is the range. Yeah, is the range. And when you're flying these short flights, you normally have to have a diversion because you might be flying over the middle of nowhere where the nearest airport's an hour away. So you have to have a diversion allocation in there. When you have a 250 nautical mile, or let's say a 1 hour flight, you're never more than 30 minutes from the airport you either took off from or you're going to. So by definition, um, we're actually working with the FAA to understand what type of diversion and reserve requirements are really required for an airplane with a range this short. So you may need to go around and circle a few times. You may need to divert, but you certainly don't need the type of diversion and reserve capacity that a big gas powered plane that's flying over the middle of the Atlantic would need. So all of those are very factors that, like I said, are this balloon that you're squeezing it here, it pops out somewhere else.
Fantastic. Yeah, and that's a common theme in aviation. I remember one of my professors saying there's no such thing as a free lunch in aviation. It's always some areas got to give.
Yep.
So that's great. Um, I got a question about the company itself, about Eviation. What do you think has contributed to Eviation's rapid growth?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. I can tell you what drew the company to me was the scrappiness of the company. And I saw this at Blue Origin. The Blue Origin had grown very fast and was still trying to put in place some of the fundamentals. And Eviation was at a point where they had not grown that fast. So it's still a very, very scrappy company. Um, and it's kind of out of sheer necessity, and it's kind of out of it's really the right the right thing to do. I think, and our CEO has said we want to remain as small as we can for as long as we can and remain with that scrappy. And once you start growing and growing and growing, and then you become compartmentalized, these are the things I saw at Honeywell and Boeing, which a company that size needs it, but you lose your scrappiness and your ability to be able to grow really fast. The other thing we've done, and this is something that's kind of near and dear to me, is we've really leveraged technologies that are out there. So we have an electric motor and we have this complicated battery system, but everything else that's on that plane, we've really gone out and listened to our suppliers and said, here's generally what we want. What can you do to help us? And what I saw a lot earlier in my career were engineers saying, they want to design stuff. So this is it. This is what we want. Make this. And over the years I was at Honeywell and Blue Origin in supply chain, I had so many discussions with suppliers in the factory, and they would say, "Oh my God, if you could just change this one little thing, this would be so much easier to make, or we could do it so much cheaper." And when I tried to chase those down, a lot of times that requirement really wasn't necessary to begin with. So this is near and dear to me to go out and talk to suppliers who have been making landing gear or composite aerostructures or avionics, been doing it for decades, and really understand what they have and give them a very vague requirement, have them provide me feedback, and then use their feedback to influence our design and how we do that. Um, and I think it's worked very well. And I'll just tout, pat ourselves on the back. So this is no secret. The first iteration of the airplane we made, it was at the Paris Air Show in 2019. It was a different design, but that burned up. The batteries caught fire and it burned, and that was in uh, January or February of 2020. And then in the next 2.5 years, we as a company, and I was only here for part of it, but we as a company said, okay, now's a chance. Let's fix these design issues. Let's build a new airplane. And in 2.5 years, we went from nothing to an airplane that successfully flew. And that's just a phenomenal timeline, I think, by anyone's standards. And it was really a scrappy nature of the company that went out to suppliers and really did not try to take on too much technical risk and leveraged what was already out there as much as we could.
Fantastic. That's great to hear, and obviously we're really excited to see what the future holds for Eviation. Um, and just a little another thing more sort of specific to uh, well, electric aviation. Um, to those passengers who might be slightly skeptical in terms of, let's say, boarding an electric aircraft, because we're so used to, turbine engines, combustion engines. That's what everybody is used to. And now, obviously, lots of people who've been flying for decades now may not be so comfortable with, getting on an electric aircraft for whatever reason. But I guess what would you have to say to those passengers who may be a little bit worried about flying on an electric aircraft for whatever reason?
In a lot of ways, in a lot of ways, an electric airplane is much simpler than a gas powered airplane. Um, the if you just look at an electric motor versus a gas powered turbofan engine, the number of parts, the complexity of it is drastically different. The benefit of the excuse me, of the gas powered engine is that it's been around and it's been tested. And certainly we're going to go through your typical flight testing campaign that all aircraft are going to go through. So we're going to have that thing fly for probably 2,500 hours of flight test, and we're going to go through all the stress tests on the airframe and put it through that same rigor before the FAA would allow us to carry passengers. But probably the biggest risk, I think, with anything that's electric, whether it be a car or a plane, is actually having a fire with the battery. We had our moment there. I just talked about it, and it's you can go see the videos on YouTube of when it did burn. And that was a real learning moment for us as a company. And we really dissected what happened and why that burned, and redesigned Alice, the one that flew, with an immense focus on safety. And there are battery cells. There were 21,000 battery cells in that, and each battery cell was encased with kind of a kind of an epoxy compound that protected it. And then those cells were put into a cartridge, and that cartridge was self-contained with fire protection systems around it. So the way in which you deal with thermal runaway situations, which are fires, and how you protect that is something that we learned it the hard way, but we have absolutely learned from it and designed that into our next plane, to the point that the FAA was actually very involved with Eviation as we did our lessons learned from that plane and that fire, and some of the standards that are out there for batteries in an aircraft were actually written by the FAA based on learnings from Eviation. So if anyone's concerned about electric flying on an electric, and you really want to question the engineers about the safety, ask them about the thermal runaway system of their battery system, because that to me is where the greatest risk resides. And it's all about suppressing it and containing it as quickly as possible and not letting it spread. And that's what happened on the plane that burned. It spread. That plane burned for hours because you can't put battery fires out with water. And it was just a matter of letting it all burn through. Yeah, so that's a great question.
Fantastic, thanks. And I know if we want to look at an aircraft that is obviously still powered by combustion, if we take the 787 Dreamliner, which we know is revolutionary in terms of the fact that it uses mainly batteries to power it. I think that was another concern about thermal runaway and things that we were looking at as well in some of our classes. So that's good to know. Expanding on that, actually, are you able to go into just a brief detail about the technology that you use in your batteries? Is it similar to like a NiCad type battery, or how does it work?
Yeah, so and this is a great question, and it's kind of the heart. So we're looking at a lot of different things with batteries. And I can tell you the batteries that went into the one that flew were the 21700 cylindrical automotive batteries. And we can meet that 250 nautical mile range at entry into service in 2027 with automotive battery cell technology. Now, there's the cell, and then you have to pack all those cells and put them into a whole system, and you have to have a cooling system and a battery management system, and all that fire protection that I talked about, and all of that comes together into a big energy system. So you're losing a little bit of your energy power when you do that. So how you do that is actually very, very important. But we can hit our 250 nautical mile range today with technology, and it's going to be a lot of batteries. Like I said, it's half of the weight. The step function that we're also looking at is actually moving beyond the automotive battery cells into some of the newer cells that are being developed. And it's really just a matter of the growth in automotive has really been what's driving battery production, and all these gigafactories that exist. Even at our rate of 100 aircraft a year, we would probably need 1 day's worth of production from a automotive battery factory to hit a year's worth of production for our airplanes. It's just we can't make up the volume. Uh, but they are pushing the technology. All the eVTOLs and all the electric companies and some of the satellites and space businesses are trying to push the cell technology to get more energy density out of a battery and not have the automotive cells, which are really focused on cost. Then you still have the same problem of taking the new cell technology and packaging it and getting as much efficiency out of it before you put it on the plane. So I think the summary way to answer that is we are starting with very simple existing technology based on automotive, and we have a long roadmap that is how we're going to get more and more range out of this airplane. One, through packing efficiency and your normal incremental changes to automotive, and then the step change function of getting different types of cells and different chemistries out there that have more energy density in them. And that's, again, our batteries will be, 10 years from now, you can take the original ones that have the 250 and put a new battery system and get 500 or 700 or however much the market really wants in terms of range.
Fantastic. Thanks. That's very, very interesting. Um, Now, just before we move on to questions that are a bit more forward-looking, we have one more specific, more engineering side question, and perhaps more of an operational question, as it were. And now, obviously, we know nowadays with let's say taking in the United States with our airlines such as Delta, United, and American, they've all got in their sort of major hubs, as it were, they have very easy access to maintenance. And if they ever have an issue on the ground and they need something to be replaced, before the next flight or something like that, it's pretty quick and easy for them to just, for Delta to just call tech ops and replace something in 15 minutes and not really have it impact the rest of the schedule. So, in terms of Alice or any aircraft that aviation is going to be making, um, how do you guys plan on making maintenance issues in terms of on a daily basis when we have scheduled flights? How do you intend on making that easier? Are there any plans to incorporate any maintenance facilities in the airports that you'll fly to?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Direct operating cost is a huge part, and if I were to jump back to our initial, who we're selling to, these are all, Cape Air is going to operate Alice out of its existing airports, and we'll have to go through our spares provisioning and make sure all of our parts that we think are going to be needed are added to the list, and Cape Air will go through the same process they go through today. um, when you start talking about getting the new airports, the little regional airports that don't have commercial flights on them today, that's something that I think will happen in time. Um, the Ideally, it won't need the level of parts that a turbofan engine. Again, all those hot section and cold section rotating. So those will be cheaper. But really, I think that how we're going to address that globally is by utilizing a lot of our suppliers, right? So I worked for Honeywell for 17 years. Honeywell has a very extensive repair network that's out there. in many ways they compete with United for repairs because United will sometimes do their own repairs, or there's third party repair shops, or there's Honeywell repair shops. And Honeywell has strategically located its repair shops throughout the world geographically to be close to their customers. And I think that's something we can certainly leverage in the beginning, when we get the plane out there, is leverage those supplier repair shops that are already there. It might not, it might mean that United can't do it themselves, which they want to do, because they think they can do it cheaper, and that's great. And as time goes on, and you got to think of decades in terms of aerospace, but in 20 years, when Alice is really out there, and there's hundreds or thousands of them out there, then I think the airlines will probably go through the same decision making that they went through with the Honeywell parts, which is we're going to do this ourselves or we're not. But in the beginning, we're gonna leverage what's already out there, and our suppliers' existing repair capabilities. Product and customer support is something we think about daily here, even though we're still 4 years away from entry into service, because that's how airlines think. They think they understand the complexity of doing that, and we have to make sure that that's part of our discussions with our customers.
Great, great, fantastic. Thank you for that. Now on to just a couple of questions that look more into the future. Now, obviously, you have a very, very healthy, broad experience in aerospace, spanning 2 decades. And obviously, you bring with that a wealth of expertise and experience. So, um, for people like us, obviously, people who are part of Air Explorer and people who visit our site are part of the younger up and coming generation that's still in college. So, with your experience and your expertise within the next decade or so, can you offer your viewpoints on like how do you think aviation is going to look throughout the next decade? Obviously, we've got Alice and Eviation coming through, but in terms of your experience, do you think there's anything else, any other changes that we're going to see in the next decade that we can look forward to?
Yeah, I think you'll see, when it comes to the really big aircraft and flying to Asia or flying to Europe, that that will still be continue to be powered with gas powered jets like it is today. And I think the biggest changes you'll see will be on the smaller aircraft like Alice or the eVTOLs that are going to take off vertically, convert to a plane, and then land. And uh, and there's several different models that are kind of competing, and different technologies that are competing. The eVTOL I just mentioned, you have hydrogen planes. Zero Avia flew a hydrogen powered plane, and then uh, Universal Hydrogen is about to fly their first flight. There's also companies out there that are doing hybrids, half gas powered, half electric. There's companies that are doing conversions, that are taking the Cessna Caravan and converting it to a hybrid or converting it to electric. So there's all sorts of competing technologies out there, and I think there's room for all of them. I think there will be a little bit of a consolidation to some extent. I don't think we're going to have 10 different VTOL manufacturers. I think there will be some just right sizing of the market as all these competing technologies and competing companies sort of settle. um, I'm obviously with Eviation. I think we found the sweet spot of we're not taking on this huge risk of having something where the operating of the airplane is not really defined, and we're really pushing the technology too far. It's a plane, takes off from an airport, has a pilot, lands at an airport. It's just electric, and that's enough for us to push the technology. But it's something I honestly, no one really knows the answer to that, because if they did, then we'd all be doing the same thing. And the fact that there are very, very smart people doing very, very different approaches to the alternatives to the gas powered engine, I think it's going to be really fun to watch it play out. And I think it will set the seeds for the next decade, when this technology will get into the bigger and the bigger and the bigger aircraft. I think in 20 years, it will look very, very different. I'm not saying we're not going to be flying gas powered planes, but there will be a lot of other alternatives that are out there.
Absolutely. And one thing we've come to learn now is that aviation it's driven by need. So it's driven by what the market needs, market pressures, etc. I'm sure you know much more than me about that. But yeah, very exciting to see what the future will hold. I think we'll round off on this one last question, which I'm sure is going to be very helpful, at least for me or whoever's joined. Is that for someone like us who's in the middle of college, perhaps finishing, do you have any advice for us in terms of if we wanted to get into a field such as yours, or just to insert ourselves into a company such as Eviation? Is there anything that you can advise us to do so that we can set ourselves up for success?
Yeah, and I would encourage people to, having worked for the big and having worked for the small, and I think we're in a place where these, aerospace is suddenly cool again, and there are startups and small companies out there like Blue Origin, like SpaceX, like Alice, and all the different planes of Alice. And I think that the learnings there are just are great, and I think when you're younger, you can take the risks, and if the company evolves or changes, you can move on more easily than when you're later in your career. So I would absolutely encourage that. I think, having been through hiring of a lot of people, you're really looking for a spark in aerospace, and you interview a lot of people who aren't in aerospace and want to get in for whatever reason, or have been in aerospace, and you try to understand, well, what's your spark, and I can kind of see it. And I did a lot of hiring at Blue Origin. You're looking for a real spark of someone who really wants to do something different. So there's a lot of people who worked at Boeing who apply to Blue Origin who say, "Hey, I want to be a part of this." And frankly, I saw it where they hired those people, and it was like, well, really, you wanted to be a part of it, but you really weren't aware of how hard it is, or what it's really like to shake that mindset that you had to do it differently. And Blue Origin had a great hiring process where you'd have to do a presentation about yourself, and the ones that left you the most wanting for more were the people who really had the passion for aerospace. So I think people who are a part of Aero Explorer, people who are at Embry Riddle. My son is in the Civil Air Patrol as a part-time thing. He's 17 years old, but things that are really displaying your passion for aerospace, it's going to give you a tremendous advantage over people who are just smart but lack that passion. It really it's how it's how you stand out in a crowd.
So would you say that unless really aviation is embedded in you as a passion, or even if we can go so far as calling it an obsession, would you say that then it's probably not the field for you unless you're really passionate about it?
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. I guess there are jobs in aerospace. It what I'll call big aero, where you can get a job and you can work there and you can do your thing, and whether it's aerospace or whether it's automotive, you're kind of doing the same thing. Certainly, if you want to work for a smaller company like Alice or like Blue Origin or any of the newer companies that are having really focused on a new technology, I think you really have to have a passion for it, because if you don't, I think your level of frustration, the level of uncertainty, the level of chaos is probably going to get the better of you, and you're not going to feel that excitement of nerding out talking about flight controls or something like that. You're going to just walk home at the end of the day saying, "Oh my god, I can't believe I'm doing this," versus here you'll walk home saying, "Wow, that was a really cool conversation I just had."
Yeah, I totally know that feeling. Whenever I explain something to do with aviation to my parents, I can just see their eyes glaze over. They have no idea what I'm talking about. But then
If you
then
don't
like
have a passion for it, it's a very cyclical industry, so you're going to
right,
end up putting up with a lot. And there are other industries that are not, they're a little bit more stable. Um, they just don't have the cool product that aerospace has.
that's exactly right. Just not as cool. Right. Well, did you have anything, Mark, to add in terms to rounding off your presentation, anything else you'd like to tell us about Eviation or Alice or about the electric aviation industry as a whole before we round off?
No, nothing I had, and I think I'll just reiterate what I said earlier, which is I think it's an exciting time. I think, when I was towards the end of Honeywell, I really felt aerospace was stale, and I looked at people in startup environments and really kind of envied them. And then all of a sudden, aerospace became cool again with the space exploration and all the new rocket providers, and then all of this electrification, the VTOLs, the hydrogen. It's just now, and I feel like I've learned more in the past few years that I learned in many years at a Honeywell and a Boeing, just because of the scope of what I've been learning is so broad that I have no regrets. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's great. That's great to hear. And I just hope I just hope when I and others who are planning to get into this industry get to your stage that will feel the same way. That's then I feel we'll have accomplished something, and hopefully we can continue your guys' efforts and legacy as we go through. And I'm sure you can help us do that as we go through our education.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Mark VanInwegen, I cannot thank you enough for doing this, for giving us this presentation, answering all our questions, such an in-depth explanation of aviation and what it means to you and what it means to the aviation industry. I cannot thank you enough. We really, really appreciate it. Um, Everyone who's attended, please do go check out Eviation and all the fantastic work they are doing. It is going to contribute massively to the aviation industry in ways that we can't even imagine. So please do go check them out, give them your support, as we are. The team at Air Explorer is so excited about the future of aviation. I mean, it just looks fantastic. And what Mark's shown us now just gives us even more hope for the future of this company. So please do go check them out. And obviously, do go check us out as well. Head to airexplorer.com, see what we're all about. Again, we are the world's largest youth-led aviation platform. If you like geeking out about aviation and looking at pictures of planes and things, which I'm sure you should, hopefully, if you're joining a webinar like this, do go check us out. For everyone who joined, you will receive a certificate of attendance and completion. So congratulations. Thank you for attending. And once again, a massive thank you to our guest. So from me and from Mark, we wish you a very pleasant afternoon or evening wherever you are. And we really look forward to welcoming you to our next webinar very soon. And we'll let you guys know when that is. But Mark, once again, thank you very much. Have a great rest of your afternoon. And hopefully we look forward to welcoming you back soon at some point in the future.
Thank you. Always look forward to an opportunity to nerd out about aviation.
Absolutely. We'll see you very, very soon. Have a fantastic afternoon, guys.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.